Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going, as I like to remind you each and every day, it expands our base. This morning I turned to my wife and I said, "What will I talk about? How should we do this morning?" And she said to me, "It's not what you're going to talk about, it's how do you choose what you're going to talk about." And she was absolutely right. This is a fascinating day, and so let's begin with the deal with Ukraine. There is now a mineral agreement which has been signed. This is good news for Ukraine. First of all, because it means the United States is now invested in the future of Ukraine. It means that when it comes time to rebuild Ukraine, there will be a stake that we in the United States and indeed in the West will have in terms of Ukraine's natural resources. This includes items which, they're going to dig for, and it's going to make a huge difference. So the deal with Ukraine makes sense to me. It is not exploiting Ukraine. It is rather giving the United States, and I think the West, the opportunity to invest in the future of Ukraine. So this is good news. Now we'll have to see what kind of concessions the United States will try to force Ukraine to make to Russia, or whether or not Ukraine will even go along with it. I think there is a fascinating future. And Ukraine, which is the breadbasket of Europe, which has so many natural resources which can be used to benefit the people of Ukraine and the people of the world, well, this may be a good thing. Now, what we don't know is how Vladimir Putin is going to react to all of this. Remember, the fact that there is a mineral deal doesn't mean that Putin has given up his ambition to control Ukraine. And one way or the other, whether the Ukrainians control the Ukraine or whether Russia controls the Ukraine, the bare truth is that those natural resources, that food supply, that's essential to whoever controls Ukraine. So now we have to wait and see. There is a second major story, and that is that former Vice President Kamala Harris spoke in San Francisco last night. It was her first major speech since her defeat in the presidential campaign. Now, one of our regular listeners asked me a question, which I'm happy to answer. Why isn't George Bush speaking out? And the answer is because Bush has decided that he is going to remain silent. And remember, he has no political future. And so he has decided that he will respect the idea of former presidents not criticizing their successors. Of course, Harry Truman was an exception in that case. But Lyndon Johnson and all the subsequent presidents have basically abided by the principle of not criticizing their predecessors, or their successors, rather. And now comes the question of Kamala Harris. I don't know what she's going to do. She could choose to run for president again. She could choose to run for governor again. And I say again because there's a lot of pressure on her now to run. We don't know what she's going to decide. It was interesting to me that Katie Porter, who is an announced candidate for governor, and you will recall, former member of Congress and a candidate for the U.S. Senate, was in attendance last night. But we have to wait now and see how Kamala Harris plots her future. Two key items. One, she clearly is going to engage in talking national politics. She's not going to be passive. She's going to be active. And I would remind you that the previous defeated candidates for president have been active. Let me give you a couple of examples. First of all, Wendell Willkie, who on Veterans Day on Armistice Day 1940, delivered a speech called The Loyal Opposition, in which he outlined how he was going to remain active in American politics. And then, of course, there was Richard Nixon, who in April of 1961 delivered his first major foreign policy speech to reporters in Washington. He wanted to make clear that he was not going anywhere. And I would suggest to you that is Kamala Harris's position as well. She is saying clearly, precisely, that she's not going anywhere. She intends to be active and critical. What about running for governor? Well, if you want a base to run for president of the United States, being governor of California is a pretty good base. But the people of California have shown that if you're going to run for governor, you better be running for governor. Now, of course, the circumstances in this potential campaign are different. Why? Because there is no Democratic nominee or Republican nominee. The top two contenders run off against each other. It's what we have done in terms of restructuring California politics. For Kamala Harris, unlike Richard Nixon, who in 1962 had hurdles to overcome, including the unity of his party and, well, the fact that he was a national figure. For Kamala Harris, it's very different. If she runs, she will most assuredly be the favorite. And the reason is because she's not running for a nomination. She's running to be number one or number two in a race. And in the end, whoever she runs against, well, Kamala Harris is going to be the favorite. If she wants to be governor of California, she will be governor of California. Let me deal now with the elephant in the room, the question of Donald Trump. Clearly, the polls are showing an erosion of support for Donald Trump. And it's clear that when it comes to the economy, he can claim that it's Biden's economy, but it isn't. It's his economy. He's the president of the United States. And frankly, when you've now served 102 days of your second term, and you have been the voice responsible for the stock market decline, you can't blame it on Joe Biden. So the most interesting aspect of this, in my mind, will be how the Republicans deal with this president. Now, a curious thing happened in Congress, in the United States Senate, because there was a vote on the question of the president's authority on tariffs. With two senators absent, it was a tie vote. And with a tie, well, you understand very clearly, the votes were not there to say that only Congress should have control over tariffs. This vote in the United States Senate puts squarely on the Republican Party the responsibility for what happens. They cannot blame Donald Trump because they have now decided to align themselves with Donald Trump and his policies on tariffs. So that vote in the United States Senate was very significant. And for the Republicans, well, they better hope that Donald Trump comes through, because if Donald Trump fails, Republicans will carry the burden of the Trump legacy. They won't be able to blame him. They'll have to assume responsibility for themselves. That, to me, is very, very important in terms of the future of American politics. How will the Democrats define themselves? Well, that's another question, because, as I've said in the past, the American people don't always just vote for, they vote against. And that is why Republicans should be worried. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am John Rothman. Make sure to follow along. Let me know your thoughts on the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and sharing an episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which, of course, is our goal. And let me point out, you can interact with me on LinkedIn, you can interact with me on Facebook, and some of you even choose to email me or call me. By the way, my question that I answered today about George W. Bush and his silence came from Tim up in Oregon. And Tim, I was glad to answer the question. And many of you who have questions, just let me know what they are, and I will try to answer them. And now, a special appreciation to the wonderful producer of this podcast, Gogo Zoger, who makes sure we're up and running every single day. Gogo, it's a pleasure. And to all of you, I'll be back tomorrow, right here on Around the Political World with John Rothman. See you then.